I want to thank you for coming out for this event. It's Judicial Activism, Advocacy from the Bench, and the ethical dilemmas behind it. So, we just wanted to focus on in the context of many social movements going on, and with the Supreme Court having a vacancy on the bench, and we want to talk about the role that judges play and some of the ethical dilemmas that may face it, or what roles can they play, if any at all, and the discretion that they might have. And so today we have two judges that came in and decided to spend their time with us, so why don't we give them a round of applause. I'm going to start by introducing our moderator, which is a professor at St. Louis University. His name is Justin Hansford. He graduated from Howard University in 2003. From there, he went on to Georgetown Law, where he took on many accolades, including starting the Critical Race Theory Journal at Georgetown. After being at Georgetown, he was a fellow at University of Maryland. I met Justin in Ferguson after he became a professor there, and he was really on the ground, one of the four-rank lawyers that was the point person for the Ferguson Legal Defense Committee. And from there, he organized and represented Mike Brown's family at the UN. Since Ferguson, he's continued his efforts as an activist, lawyer, and focusing on legal ethics. He's a Fulbright scholar recently, coming back from South Africa, so he's back home, so we should thank him for that. And Justin is just going around continuing economic justice, critical race theory, and focusing on judicial activism. So why don't we give Professor Hansford a round of applause.
Thank you, Marcus. And I just wanted to start out by saying that you should feel very privileged to have such a wonderful young man as Marcus as your colleague. He also has been active in Ferguson and Baltimore, in many of the social movements that are taking place all across the country, Flint, Michigan, the list goes on. So actually, I want to start off by giving him a round of applause. So give him an A. If you have a professor, give him an A. So first of all, thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here. I have been in South Africa recently, hence my shirt, my Nelson Mandela shirt. But I'm very happy. Out of all the places I've been in the world, I don't think it gets much better than this to have Black women who are judges be able to come and share their wealth of knowledge with us. Last night I watched a show called Black Girls Rock. Some of you may have seen that. It's a show that comes on BET, and it celebrates the many contributions that Black women have made in all different areas of endeavor, entertainment, politics, social justice. And I think it's important for us to also recognize that in law, and in particular in the judiciary, Black women have a long history of making significant contributions. And so today, we're very honored to have two honorable judges here to discuss the topic of judicial activism. And it's not what you think. So when you think about judicial activism, some of you may think immediately about the use of the judicial role in a way that is seen by many as improper. But we're going to expand that definition today and ask ourselves, is it possible in this time and in this age where we talk about the ills of the criminal justice system, we talk about injustice on the grounds of race taking place all the time, is it possible that judges can, within the legitimate bounds of their role and their duty, play a part in our social movements? Can they be judicial activists in a good way? So to answer these questions, we're going to have two exemplary judges here today, the Honorable Tyra Wright and the Honorable Judge Lady Arthur. Both discuss these questions. And I was going to introduce them, but their bios were like 3 or 4 pages long. So what I was going to do was to have them answer this first question in a way that might also give us some understanding of their background. First question being, how did you become a judge? And what was your path? And is this something that you would recommend to others in the audience? So, Judge Wright, I'll start with you.
Stand up there.
Sure, yep.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Tyra Wright, and I am a 1997 graduate of Catholic University, a member of BLSA, Law Review here, and Moot Court. I was telling your BLSA president here that I was so excited to see the school again, and I wondered, I wonder what it looks like. Does it still look nice? And you all have been taking very good care of it. Thanks for your stewardship. Now, yes, the question about how I got to the position. I am a state administrative law judge with the state of Michigan. My claim to fame there is that I've handled so many different types of cases. I have done in the 9 years that I've been there, hearings involving commercial license matters, health profession administrative hearings, unemployment appeals, wage and hour complaints, child abuse and neglect registry findings, and child and adult foster care cases. I came to the position from just one other legal job experience. I started my career after leaving Catholic at Ford Motor Company, where I was in the litigation practice group of the General Counsel's office, so couldn't be any further away from what I do now. I managed auto product liability cases in-house. The cases were all over the country, helped pick outside counsel, expert witnesses, trial strategy, negotiating settlements of those matters. The only time I was actually in court was in discovery motions. Anybody want to take a guess why that is? Why would you have the in-house lawyer argue the discovery motion? The judges hate them. So if you're the outside trial lawyer, it's like, Tyra, why don't you handle this one? They don't want to get involved in those arguments because some judges are like, why can't you just settle that? I don't want to be involved in the disputes about how many thousands of pages of documents you're going to produce or not produce. So I would love to tell you that when I was standing here or sitting here in your seat, that I had a path laid out, that I knew what I wanted to do, that I was just a dynamo, and I said, I'm gonna do this, that, and the other, and I followed my path and ended up as a state administrative law judge. But no, I came here from a journalism degree. I first thought I was going to do First Amendment law, and then I got excited about commercial transactions, and I wanted to do that, and then so every time I took a class and enjoyed it, I changed my mind about what I wanted to do, and finally ended up fishing through the placement office for a summer position and found out that Ford used to recruit on campus here. One sheet of paper in a folder, and that sheet of paper was yellow. I pulled it out, this is home. So I called and they said, no, we don't recruit there anymore, but we're gonna be there at a job fair. So I went to the job fair, ended up with a summer internship, then decided, and if I could take a class and decide I wanna do that. If you spend 3 months somewhere, you're gonna really wanna do that. So that's how I decided I wanted to go forward. Through some family situations, my mother ended up getting sick and I needed to take care of her. There was this big issue going on at the company around 2003 or 4. Anybody remember what that is? About some vehicles rolling over. So we had a hard time. I was at ground zero in those cases. At that time, I did tire cases for the company. They were not considered to be particularly a hot area, but it became hot when these vehicles started rolling over and we found out that the tires played a role in it. So flash forward, my mother ends up getting ill. Because the company was in turmoil, I really couldn't take time off to attend to her. So I bit the bullet and decided that because she only had 2 children, my brother wasn't in town, he wasn't in the state of Michigan, that I had to be the one to take care of her. So I gave myself a 1-year sabbatical. So I resigned, figured, oh, to attend to my mother's needs, and maybe I'll come back to Ford, or maybe I'll go to General Motors or Chrysler, or maybe I'll do something else in Michigan. I actually thought about doing product liability cases at Kellogg. I'd gotten a call from a recruiter, and I thought, well, if I can do product liability cases involving auto accidents, I mean, how injured can you be from a box of cereal? I'll probably do that. That was as much pre-planning as I had ever done in my legal career. And so I took care of my mother. I had enough money to live without working for a year. So I thought I won't even look for a job for 6 months. I'll just devote that time to my mother. So 6 months later, I started looking for a job, and it took me 8 months. So if you can do the math, 2 months were dicey. And I ended up getting offered the job at the state. The job that I have now is the state ALJ. It was just that random. It was just that random. And so I took it because it was interesting. I worked summers here for a lawyer, Donald Temple, who taught me that you do whatever you want to do. And you don't worry about somebody telling you later, you can't do this because your experience is in that. You decide what you want to do. Pick a job, and if it's interesting to you, and just do your best at it. So I decided this job to stay was a job that I could do. It would be interesting enough. The very first week I knew I loved it. I felt every day that I made a difference. I realized for the first time that the reasons why I liked the job at Ford were not the right reasons. At Ford, I liked the fact that I could tell people I'm an attorney for Ford Motor Company that has cachet in Michigan. And I imagine some places else around the country. I liked the fact that every year I got to pick a new vehicle. All my friends were like, why don't you get this, why don't you get that? I liked the fact that I was off during the shutdown period between Christmas and New Year. None of those things, when you look at it now, are the reasons why you pick a job. Not for the prestige, not for the benefits. It's to make a difference. So I stumbled. And I'm okay with it. I'm okay with admitting that. I stumbled into learning that it's always better to make a difference. After that first week, I knew this is what I want to do. There's always at least 2 parties sitting in front of you, and they are totally trained in on what you're saying, what you're listening to. It makes a difference to them. Instant gratification every day that you are making a difference. That's why I love this job. Please forgive me because I can't tell you that how I got there other than what I just said. I wouldn't have even have known that those opportunities existed had it not been for the fact that I just stumbled upon it. Some of you are going to be that A-type person that charts your course and you'll get there, and others of you will be like me and you'll just stumble into it. But I would tell you, as long as you are interested in doing the best that you can do and keep your eyes and ears open and be willing to try something new, that you'll get there, whether or not it's a straight course or like me, a meandering path. Thank you.
Great.
We have a ton in common, which is really funny to me because I'm class of 1998 from Howard University School of Law. Anybody in Howard in the house?
Hello.
I am a Washingtonian. I am a native Washingtonian, born, raised, the whole thing here. I went to University of Maryland College Park. I have a degree in government and politics. Always wanted to be a lawyer. Clearly, I like to talk. This is what was made for me. It was great. And then I went to law school. I met my husband there. It was great. I always thought I would be a civil rights lawyer, so that's where I started. I started with working on the black farmers cases at USDA. That was great for a while. I met someone, stumbled across someone at a luncheon. They said, come work with us at the SEC. I went there, but I was like, that's not so exciting. And then I thought, well, I got that, that mid-year, I was only 30 something, but I was like, this is just not it. It's not that exciting. So at that point I was married already. I had 2 kids and I was like, how am I 33 and like, what's next? So I had the harebrained idea to go back and get my MBA. That was really harebrained. Because it is, you don't have the same mental capacity that you think you have when you're younger. With 2 kids, I felt like I had poisoned my backpack, my roll when I was going off to war, and it was rough. But during that time period, one of my classmates, he was a 3rd year when I was a 1st year, was Adrian Fenty. Adrian Fenty became the mayor of Washington. Started out pretty good. And during that time period, I've been doing labor and employment this entire time. And during that time period, he said, we have this office called the Office of Employee Appeals in the district. And if you were ever fired or dismissed from your job, you can appeal those cases to there. And I want you to run the whole thing. I thought, that sounded great. But I wasn't sure, so I took that job. And during that time period, my wonderful husband was appointed to be a judge himself. And he became a judge at DC Superior Court, and I was a little annoyed because I am frankly a better lawyer than he was. If you all have met him, you might be like, yeah, you're right. He's terrific. And I was just trying to figure out how to make my way. And I'm very type A, like you referred to. I'm very much methodical, A, B, C, D, E. This is not going the way I thought it was, and it was very frustrating because I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I wasn't sure, and I was sort of making my way and easing in and out. And I forgot to mention to you, when I was trying to figure myself out, this is an important thing I shouldn't have left out. Before I went back to get my MBA, I told you I wasn't so happy at the SEC, so I got offered a job as a professor at a community college. I was pregnant with my daughter at the time, and I said, you know what, I'm just gonna take it. I took a 50% pay cut. I was excited because I was making 6 figures. And I said, I'm just gonna go. Teaching was easy. It's easy to talk to students. I said, I'm just gonna go. My husband, once he picked us up off the floor from what I told him, I said, I'm just gonna do it. We're gonna make it. My stomach is out to here. And we were in private practice at the time. I said, I'm gonna quit the job. We're going to private practice. And I'm gonna do the teaching during the part-time, and I'm gonna teach full-time and do the practice part-time. We became Arthur and Arthur during that time period. So fast forward, he's picked himself off the floor, and we made it. And during that time period, he became a judge. But I still was like, what about me? I mean, it was good. And my daughter now is like 3 or 4, and she's at school. And I'm thinking, what have I done? What have I done? Have I upended my career? You quit the job with the stupendous benefits. The kids are at school now. You've done all these things, and now what's going to happen? So I'm kind of meandering around, not really sure. I went back, got my MBA, and then I had that horrible moment when they say, now you're overqualified. You have a JD and the MBA, you have supposedly the best blue chip degrees, but then they don't kind of want to pay you. And sometimes it's challenging being a woman of color. It's challenging coming from Howard University School of Law because the presumption is you must not be as good as anybody else because you went to a black school. So you're just in that. And I went to my wonderful University of Maryland twice. I went back to get my MBA from University of Maryland. But it didn't matter. So it was a troubling time for me in my life, and I just decided to surrender. Because the moment you let go, the moment I stopped trying to figure it out and put things in space and figure it out, things just started coming to me. They just started coming to me. My husband started his career at the Public Defender Circuit, which is the best in the country. And I got a call on a whim one day, and someone said, we're looking for someone that can help us, deal with all the management issues. You have an MBA, all these things, why don't you come? Now my MBA is in international business. I'm trying to figure out how they thought that was gonna work at home. But I didn't ask a lot of questions. So I took that job, and it was great. And I got to be and again, this is still this public service sort of thing I was doing. I love teaching. Teaching was magnificent, but they give you really a penny a day at the community college. It wasn't very much to live on. And I just did that, and then being at the Public Defender Service, I was still giving. It still felt purposeful. So one day on a whim, someone told me they had a job opening at the Office of Administrative Hearings. Now, when I was at OEA, which is the Office of Employee Appeals, if you lost your job and they found that you should have lost your job, you could actually appeal within that office. So it just so happened that because I was the chief financial officer, I was also their chief appeals judge. So I wrote all these appeals on these reviews. I didn't realize at the time that would be the thing that made them want to hire me to be an administrative law judge. I just thought I was writing appeals and helping out. It didn't seem that important to me. But I guess the discussion I'm trying to have with you is that things were placed in my path that I didn't do, that I didn't ask for, that I didn't think would matter, led me to this job. So I said, okay, forgive me. I'm just going to apply for this job. I don't know if I have the experience, what have you. It just fell right in my lap. So in some ways that you were saying that, Judge Wright was saying is that it's not like I sat down and thought, I wanted to figure it out. I'm still unfortunately a figure it out type of girl. Maybe not a girl because I'm kind of old to be a girl. But the point is that I like to have it figured out. But all the things that have come to me have come by nothing I have done. You walk around, you network, you passing out cards. Nothing has come to me because I figured it out. It literally fell in my lap. Somebody sent me an email who had worked with me at OEA and said, ha, do you want to be a judge again? They got an opening here, ha ha. And I said, ha ha, hell, this way. And on a whim, I applied. I really was, I was like, oh, maybe so. And so I applied, and it just fell in my lap. And it is, now I sit we have a central panel in DC that hears 40 jurisdictions. I hear everything from trash cases to mental health claims to disability returns to TANF to food stamps I even hear cases on consumer regulatory affairs where if you're caught selling synthetic cannabinoids, I can shut down your business. So I hear everything from Scooby snacks to your overflowing trash. So it is, like Tara was saying, the most exciting job, and I get to put on a black robe every day. When I first got the job, people keep saying, Judge, I'm like, who are you talking to? It's just, still every day I still say that to myself, are they talking to me? I'm a regular old PG County girl who lived at the bottom of Iverson Street. You know what I'm saying? That's where I'm from. And neither of my parents went to college. So when they say Hope and Dream of the Slave, that's me. I was the first person in my family to get to that level. So now I stand here and I'm thinking, I'm gonna fool you and say that I'm somebody that I'm not. This is just regular old Sherry from Temple Hills. So when you have in your mind all these grand plans and you're gonna figure it out, for me, the figuring it out got me nowhere. When I surrendered and just place myself in good places, talk to the right people, just happen to be places, that's when things change. I told you when I got the job at the SEC, I met this woman at a conference luncheon, and she happened to be sitting at the same table as me. That's what I'm saying. Much like Tyra was saying, once you surrender, things fell in my lap. So now I hear all these things. My husband hears criminal law cases, and we're talking about something that's so important because we're talking about activism, and I think the challenge for us as judicial officers is how much can you really do without ending up on Channel 9 News? And unfortunately, my office has been on Channel 9 News lately. So the idea is how much can you do? So that's my background, and I hope that I can provide something worthwhile to you today.
And also, we were lucky enough to have the third judge join us, Judge Johnson. So without further ado.
I apologize, first of all, I have to apologize for being late, because as judges, when y'all are late in front of us, it is not pretty. So I have to apologize for that. I'm so happy to be here. I'm honored and humbled to have been asked to be a part of the panel. My background, I'll give you just a little bit of my background. I too am a Prince George's County girl, raised in Prince George's County, educated in Prince George's County Public Schools. And I went to the University of Virginia, double majored in economics and sociology, and I attended law school at Duke University School of Law. But I always knew that I wanted to come back to Prince George's County, come back to this area, because it's always been my home, and I believe it's probably the best place in the country to live. I think I knew when I was in diapers that I wanted to be a judge. I don't know why I knew that, how I knew that. I didn't know any judges. My parents are not lawyers. If I could have been a judge out of high school, I would have been a judge out of high school. They told me to go to college. I was okay, I'll do that. When you go to law school, though, you realize that there's so many different aspects to the law, and you understand that it really is a very complex and moving and living and breathing thing. And I too wanted to go to law school and save the world. I wanted to work for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and save the world. And then I got those law school loans. I'm sure some of you all can understand my strife with the law school loans. I was in law school at a time when the law firms were really booming. And there was a salary war in the law firms that when we were looking at sort of summer associate positions and applying, the law firms were whining and dining you, and they were coming and they were picking you up and flying you across the country and doing I mean, this was this crazy time. And I remembered thinking, I didn't really have a full understanding of what a law firm was really, but sure, if you want to fly me to New York for an interview, okay, that's fine. I'll come up there, right? And then it got real serious when they started making offers. And I think when I started the process, they were talking about 90,000, and for no reason at all. Over the course of my interview season, salaries had bumped up to like 125.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so I'm from Prince George's County, and my parents weren't lawyers, and my father said, girl, they're gonna pay you what? That may not be what you want to do, but try, for that amount of money, try that, right? So it's hard to, when you have nearly 6 figures in loans, to walk away from a 6-figure salary with no, no actual experience. Hard to walk away from that. So I got pulled into the large law firm life. I started out of law school working for a large Chicago-based firm with a very large DC office. At the time, I think there were about 600 attorneys. Now I think they're probably over about 1,500. They're still here in DC and in Chicago, a really, really big firm. And I went in and they had all these different practice areas and practice groups, and the attorney that headed the energy and derivative markets group went to Duke and liked me. So that's where I got put. First life lesson. Don't ever let anybody else dictate your life course, right? But I got put in energy derivative markets, right? And a lot of you are looking at me thinking, what is that? Anybody ever heard of Enron, right? I got put into that right at the Enron time. So I'm working on front page news stuff. And it was interesting, and we represented huge investment banks, and it was, hot button topic, interesting, but I didn't love it. I didn't love it. Life lesson number 2, no matter how much they pay you, if you don't love it, it's hard to go to work every day.
Sure.
Right? No matter how much they pay you, you can buy as many nice purses as you want, right? But if you gotta sit in those offices and walk in those doors every single day, it's really, really hard. In my heart, as I told you all, I'm a Prince George's County girl, wanted to go back to Prince George's County, and I wanted to be a trial attorney. I wanted to be a judge, but I wanted to see the inside of a courtroom. If you know anything about large law firms with large litigation, if you're the junior associate, you're not getting anywhere near the courthouse, much less the courtroom. So I decided to walk away from that 6-figure salary. And I went to the Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office. I wanted to become a prosecutor in the community where I grew up, right? So I, at the time, was getting married and had a very supportive husband, fiance. Life lesson number 3, you gotta pick somebody that's supportive, right? You gotta pick somebody, you all gotta be on the same page. When he married me, and we dated in college, but when he proposed, I was making 6 figures at a big firm, and right before we got married, I hated it, and he said, leave. So, walked away from 6 figures, went into the Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office. In 3 weeks, I'm in court trying cases like that, because that's what I wanted to do. And I did that for a couple of years, trying traffic cases, criminal cases, getting my experience, having jury trials, all of that stuff, and got lured back into private practice, doing some civil stuff. So I got a call from a firm, very different from the firm that I started with. This was a DC-based firm, but I was now given the opportunity to do plaintiff's work, right? Policyholder side litigation and insurance coverage stuff, really plaintiff's work. So I had done some defense stuff. Now I had done the prosecution stuff. I could handle myself in the courtroom, and now I wanted the opportunity to do the civil side on the plaintiff side. And so I went to an amazing firm, great firm, loved it, wonderful people there, worked there for about 7 years. And one of the partners that I developed a relationship with while we were at the firm had gotten an amazing job as the general counsel of Washington Gas Light Company. And I was still at the firm, and we'd talk all the time, and we'd go to lunch, and she had a position open for the director of litigation, and we kept going to lunch, and I'm like, oh, she's interesting, all this new stuff, she's general counsel, and we're going to lunch talking about her transition, and she keeps talking about this director of litigation position, and the interviews, and the process, and so finally she called me, she's like, Lisa, why don't I have your resume? Like, what are you doing? And I'm thinking, me? Really? And I applied, I go on the interview, we spent the whole day, we went to lunch, she took me out to an environmental site, and I talked with her environmental manager, and we spent the whole day, I'm in heels, walking around in the environmental site, talking to the environmental manager, and I get the job, and a year in, I get a call from the governor. It didn't quite happen that way. I did apply for the judgeship because, as I told you, I always wanted to be a judge, but it's a process, right? It's not something that you just, to sit on the district court, you just sort of walk into. So I had gone through the process, I had made it on the short list, I had met with the governor, then Governor O'Malley, and really then at that point it was a waiting game. And I was happy where I was, in-house, loving the in-house life, loving that really interesting stuff, managing an entire litigation department for Washington Gas, and you get the call from the governor, and that you take that call. I've been on the bench in Prince George's County District Court. Now it'll be 3 years in July. I love what I do. I echo what my colleague said. I love what I do. For me, it is still very awkward when people call me judge. It's very weird, and it's very weird when it's people that, like, I've been around and involved in the bar, and you see people that have known you from, like, you know, taking shots at happy hour that are like, judge, and you're like, who is he? Oh, me? Really? It's weird. It's still, it takes some getting used to. But what I will say is I love the work that I do, and I love the fact that, you know, I sit on the district court, which is a trial level court. We deal with a lot of pro se litigants. We do civil cases, criminal cases, landlord-tenant cases, traffic cases, domestic violence cases. We do bail reviews for all of the cases that come through the criminal system. So there's a lot of variety in what we do, but I get daily interaction with people, and I get to see that instant gratification where, you know, you have the ability to really impact people's lives. And I think more importantly and more on topic is you have the ability to help shape the way that members of the public view government in general, but the judiciary specifically, right? How they're addressed, how they're treated. People call me Your Honor. I say yes ma'am, no ma'am, right back to them. Right? Because I'm respectful of who they are in our community and of the fact that they've allowed me to serve them in this way. So that's my story. I'm happy to be here. I think it's a great topic, so I'm happy to share.
All right, so we're gonna get into the topic of the evening, and feel free, the microphones here can be used as well, so you won't have to get back up and come back and forth. But I want to raise the issue of judicial activism with this first question, really helping us to understand the concept and how it plays out in your courtroom. So we know that Chief Justice Roberts has said that being a judge is like being an umpire in a baseball game. You're just calling the balls and strikes. It's very mechanical. And the question that I wanted to start out with is, where is the judicial discretion? So where is the line where you've gone too far, you've now become a judicial activist, as opposed to being within the proper role of the judge and having an opportunity to illustrate and to use your judicial discretion, and in particular, is there anything special that you can bring to the job, being that you're Black women? Because, you know, that if you are indeed just a mechanical umpire, why couldn't all the judges be white men if it's just a mechanical job which involves calling balls and strikes? What is it that you think, as a Black woman, you can bring to the job in that realm of judicial discretion? So it's a really long-winded question, but just your thoughts on how your background affects your use of judicial discretion. So whoever wants to start.
I told you I like to talk. I'll be quick though. You know what's funny, because I hear lots of different types of cases, but let me just be clear. My mother is from rural Alabama, and she went to segregated schools. And every time I hear a Medicaid case or a public benefits case, I envision my mother sitting in the courtroom. I envision, does she understand what I'm saying? Meaning, because that's what you see. And whenever you see like folks on, like I'm on Facebook, and then like I saw recently where they had posted where this judge had given this long soliloquy to a person. I think it was a young man that she was sentencing or something, and in my mind I go, ooh, would I have said all of that? But do I need to say that? When you're being recorded, like in my office we're recorded, and I always am playing back, how would that play out if it replayed again, on the news? And so that's why when you talk about activism, activism as long as I'm not on the television. Activism so there's this constant balancing act. And I think about that every day. But at the same time, I also know colleagues who are not the same race as I, and who will have someone in the audience that looks like my mother, who might be frowning, because you know how folks get this look on their face when you're explaining something they don't understand. And I'll restate, I don't have to say, do you understand? I've seen them say, I'm not gonna explain it to you, just have a lawyer explain it to you. And so is that my version of activism? Yeah, because I am given the opportunity to restate it, spell it out more simply, or say, here's, if you like, we have a resource center out in a lobby. You are able to go out there and get help. It's a constant battle about what you say and how it's perceived. Not what you meant, but how it's perceived. So when you talk about activism, I don't necessarily think any of us are activists in the sense that perhaps you think of. But the things we do and the decisions we make might be activists, perhaps. Maybe they'll disagree, but that's sort of how I see that.
Judge, did you want to answer?
Yeah, sure.
All right, I would say yes. We bring something special to it. Everybody brings something special to it. You bring yourself to it. So even if you're a white male from the Appalachians or a white male from Brooklyn, New York, who is just cool, you're gonna bring that to it. So what I like to think of that I bring special to it is the ability to listen. I was the youngest in my family, and I came from a family of people who like to sit around the dinner table and after dinner talking about politics, religion, everything you're not supposed to talk about at work, calling radio stations, and I always wanted to get into the debate. And my family had no problem knocking me down, figuratively, when what I said didn't make sense. So I always had to fight to be listened to. So that's one of the things that I bring to my position. Sometimes when I think it's gonna be too much to explain to somebody what I actually do, and they say, what do you do for this state? I say I get paid to listen. Because when you break it all down, that's what it is. Now, as a state administrative law judge, yeah, we have lots of discretion. There are and I'll try to keep this brief, but everything from having to decide whether or not someone has good cause for a late appeal. I've got a lot of discretion there, and I use it. So if you come in, I don't know how much you might know about Detroit, but Detroit has a horrible mass transit situation. I mean, put mass transit in quotes, it's kind of like a few buses, and half of them are late. So if you tell me, Your Honor, I missed the last hearing or I'm late for this hearing because I was waiting on the bus, with me, I'm gonna find good cause.
Yeah.
As simple as that. I use it when like the judge said, when someone doesn't understand what's going on. I will also take that little bit of extra time. And let's just be honest, if you haven't figured this out, when you have 3 black women on a panel over 40, in my case over 50, we really only have one setting, and that's candid. We really can't do anything else. So I'm being candid with you. Sometimes after the hearing, when there's only been one party there, I won't take up time when there are 2 parties. After the hearing, of course, I can't talk about the hearing after the hearing. But if I find there's something that I need to address, that I feel like I can impart to you, after I turn the recording off, I address it. Young man, you cannot go through all of your 20s without having substantial employment, because that's what you're going to trade on in your 30s. So you won't have anything to trade on in your 30s. If you don't have anything to trade on in your 30s, in your 40s, it will be very hard for you to get employed. I might say that after an unemployment appeals hearing. When I did cases involving the Department of Human Services, state medical benefits, food assistance, cash assistance, I might say to a social worker, please, when you come in next time, have your exhibits marked. Some people might say that's stepping outside the lines. I say it's making sure that I use the time that I have wisely. And if I can advise someone in that manner how to appear before me, I'll do it. One last thing. When I was trying to prepare for this and I was reading on judicial activism, I kind of scared myself because I realized, oh, okay, yeah, I probably could easily be perceived as a judicial activist because I have to make the decision that makes sense. Yes, I have to do it within the bounds of the law, but it has to make sense to me. It has to pass the smell test. So one quick example, and I'll turn it over. In unemployment appeals cases in Michigan, you have 30 days to appeal an adverse decision. If you appeal after 30 days, your appeal will come to me and I have to first decide whether or not it's good, you have good cause, I've shown good cause for a late appeal. After a year, you're not supposed to be able to have a hearing, period. But I've had situations in front of me where the unemployment agency has come in a fraud case and said, Your Honor, we don't think that was fraud. But we've already collected some restitution, we might have collected tax return, tax refunds, and we might have even garnished paychecks. But, we don't think there was any fraud. Well, should that decision stand because the person has appealed after a year and the agency is now saying they didn't do anything wrong? I have to do what I think is right. And if the agency is saying no fraud, I don't feel good about letting the party walk out having paid for something that even the agency says they did not do. That could be considered judicial activism. If it is, I'm an activist. Now, the other thing I learned is that definition of judicial activism is pretty hard to pin down. Some people say it's any decision you didn't like as an example of judicial activism. But what I like to say is I have to do within the bounds of the law what is right in my eyes. One very practical and selfish reason for handling things that way is you have to live with yourself. You have to be able to sleep at night. Again, the way I tend to do it is when I have those areas where I can look at what's reasonable. Was this reasonable? Did the person make a good faith effort? That's where I find that wiggle room. Thank you.
Thanks.
My response to that is I too struggle with the term judicial activism because when you look at how it's defined and how it's used, it's usually used by someone who has an ideological difference with the way the court ruled. Like, it's not necessarily a reflection of the judiciary. It is, a conservative Republican piece of legislation that was struck down, and it's those liberal activist judges, right? And so it's sort of this negative connotation that's applied when somebody doesn't like the outcome of the court, or where somebody is so firmly rooted in their perspective that they can see it no other way. And if the court ruled outside of that, oh, well, that's just a judicial activist, right? My view of it is, I go into work every day knowing that I have taken an oath to interpret the law as it is and apply it to the facts as they're presented to me. That is my oath. That is what I have sworn to do. I take that very seriously. But I find that even with the most simple piece of law, there's a large space for interpretation, even in the most simple piece of law. Judicial activism is usually used to apply these very broad, sweeping, lofty interpretations of the Affordable Care Act, hundreds of pages of legislation, and how the courts have interpreted that, right? And so when you sit on a court like mine, you're doing traffic cases or landlord-tenant cases, really you're looking at comparatively so very simple pieces of legislation. And so is there room to be a judicial activist in that? So for example, if you're looking at something as simple as the driving while suspended. You should not knowingly drive a vehicle while your license is suspended. Very simple, right? Very simple. It doesn't sound on the face of it that there's a whole lot of room for interpretation there. Is your license suspended or not? Guilty or not guilty? It's pretty simple, right? Right? But when you look at those terms and break them down, you should not knowingly do it. Well, what does knowingly mean? Knowingly means you know it. Either you know it or you don't. But at some point in the course of our legal history, there was a dichotomy between constructive knowledge and actual knowledge. Okay, so that very simple piece of legislation, you should not knowingly drive a vehicle while your license is suspended. And now you have, well, what does it mean to know? What does it mean to know? Right? And then how do you apply that to the infinite possibilities of the fact patterns that they're going to be presented to you? You know, especially in the area where we live, where the foreclosure crisis was so huge, and homeowners are being forced out of their homes, right? People that had stable addresses were being forced out of their homes, and then the MBA sends a letter to that address and says, your license is suspended, right? And says, well, you know, knowingly, constructive knowledge, they send it to your last known address, you're deemed to have known it, therefore your license is suspended, they send it to your last known address, and so now you're facing a year in jail on that? Do I apply that at the stage of guilt? Do I apply that at the stage of sentencing? And if I do it in a way that somebody feels is wrong, am I a judicial activist? Or do I say, no, it should be actual knowledge. If you're facing your liberty being deprived, you should actually have known and then done it anyway. Right? And so where's the law on that? So even in the most simple piece of law, the most simple thing, right? You have room for reasonable interpretations, that intelligent, well-intentioned people could look at that piece of legislation, that law, and look at those facts and come out differently. Well, it's your responsibility as a driver to notify the motor vehicles when you move, and so you didn't, and they sent it to that address, and what else are they supposed to do? Right? Or there's no way that you should be facing a year in jail because you didn't really know that your license was suspended. I think reasonable minds could differ on that and not necessarily be activists. And so I struggle with that term, judicial activism. There's so many places in our law where you have standards like good cause, where it's really subject to interpretation, standards like reasonableness, right? Or the average person, or all of these standards that you all are learning about now. And from the judicial perspective, if somebody sort of deviates from maybe what somebody strongly believes is the right way, then is that judge a judicial activist? It really is more of a question to me than an answer, quite frankly. Yeah.
Wonderful. So I'll answer the question with another question. This one's a little bit more difficult, but of course, I live in and around Ferguson, and the issues involving what's been happening with use of force, police violence, mass incarceration, what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, they thrust all of us into this critique of the criminal justice system and the justice system writ large recently. And you three, as judges, are inside the system, and you have special knowledge of how it works, how it functions, and how these outcomes come to be. So if we were to think of the other definition of judicial activism, the judge as perhaps someone who is trying to fight against mass incarceration or trying to pursue justice, what role do you think you could have, or would you like to have, or do you have any insights on how this huge problem in our time could be addressed from the viewpoint of the judiciary? Or is there anything that we can do to make movement on those key questions as a judicial activist, quote unquote? Those would be the
One thing that we do, I'm the president of the Michigan Association of Administrative Law Judges, and one of the things that we do is not on a regular basis, but when we can have meetings where we are attracting visitors meaning other judges that are not a part of the organization. We'll try to have discussions about bias. We all have them, and we're human. And what I find is as long as you know what your bias is, you can kind of account for it. Now, that doesn't have to be racial bias. If you had a really good grandfather, you might be biased toward older gentlemen who are distinguished who come into your hearing room. If you had a really bad father who was, neglectful, you might be biased against guys who come in and maybe haven't paid their child support or have done something else. So knowing your bias, talking with other judges about how we handle matters. For example, in this context, listening, trying not to prejudge, recognizing that people from different experiences or backgrounds might express themselves differently. For example, when you have parties that are representing themselves, we as administrative law judges, we actually have a responsibility to still assist them. You can't be their advocate, which is why it's difficult, but assist them in getting information out. Well, if you don't really track well with the way that person is talking, you might need to take a break. And as one of my colleagues did, came across to my office to ask me about a slang term that was used. What does that mean? I was really proud of her for coming across the hall to ask me that, because that meant she was trying to understand this person, where she really could have just dismissed him as, not putting his case forth adequately. Those are the types of things that I feel like I can do to make sure that people are being fairly heard. In Michigan, we have a large Middle Eastern population. Some people, there's also a large Indian population, large Hispanic population. We get a lot of interpreter hearings. Most judges don't like those hearings because they take 2 to 3 times as long. But that's a way, in my book, to try to make sure that the things that we see going on across the country at least aren't happening in our little square corner of the world, that people are getting fair hearings. That even though it might take longer, that I'm patient with that person, that I'm looking at them to see, are they understanding what's going on? Even if I have to continue a hearing. I mean, I'm on the clock with, some hearings I only have an hour to do, but I'll need to continue it if the pace of this hearing has to be slow enough for this person to understand what's going on. That's what I feel is necessary in our little sphere of the world to keep things fair, just recognizing that we're not all the same.
I just have two quick things. I don't hear criminal cases. I mean, other than the fact that the District of Columbia will give you a ticket if they catch you with marijuana, and it is less than that, it is processed through our office. I don't hear any criminal cases. But one thing I did learn is that I really didn't understand, quote, my blackness until I had a black son. And the reality, he's 16, and the gravity of Ferguson and Trayvon Martin and the New York case and the millions of cases fell on my shoulders like nothing I can put into words. And there's nothing that I can do to divorce myself from my feelings. And every judge has feelings. There's nothing you can say that can make, and so for, when you think about a judge, that's a human being. So I think to myself, so am I more likely, if I'm in criminal court, to get a worse sentence if that judge gets rear-ended that morning, or if he oversleeps, or if he's having a bad day? You notice I keep saying he. Because I guess my presumption is that male judges are going to be worse than females. Maybe not necessarily so. But what I do, I guess I'm saying all this to say is that I come to work and I cannot take off my race. I cannot take off my experience. I cannot change any of that. And I am certain in some unwritten place in the back of my mind, it's affecting my decisions every day. When I have cases that involve people, we have a large Ethiopian population here. We have them here for, matter of fact, it was a business that was going to be closed down because yes, they were selling the dreaded Scooby snacks at the and they had an interpreter. And I realized that, this is small, I was butchering this woman's name. And I read somewhere that one of the best ways to disrespect someone is to not even attempt to pronounce their name correctly. And I said, please forgive me, help me pronounce your name correctly. And the look that came across her face, I think she understood where I was trying to be, what I was trying to understand. So again, I can't take off all of what I am. I can't do that. but I want the person to understand that I'm trying to place myself where you are. There should be a dialogue. It should be an evenness to that. And I'm thinking about what Judge Wright just said about helping your colleagues. Because a colleague of mine, kid you not, came to me and said, Sherry, what does "Bye Felicia" mean? Because she really didn't know, and because she didn't know. And it was a part of the discussion, and when I asked her, she goes, oh, I thought she was saying "Bye Felicia," saying bye to me, like she was reading it as something disrespectful to her when she was reiterating a conversation. So perhaps, are these the little things? Because I don't do that kind of work, but are these the little things that might affect and make a change? Maybe. I'm just applying my experience. Again, I told you my husband, does juvenile adult arraignments, and he hears crazy every day, and he feels the same way. I have to. The moment that I leave myself behind, I don't convey to a young man that maybe I'll reach one, maybe I'll make a difference, and that's what sort of back to the activism discussion we've been having. Is that his level of activism? Perhaps. Is that, I have judges who will refuse to do the cases that require an interpreter. How can you say that? How can you tell somebody, I'm not going to allow you to testify because I don't feel like being bothered with the interpreter? It's those kinds of things that sort of to relate to what you're saying, not as directly because I'm just the other person that does administrative hearings. But it's important that you convey that to the people that stand before you.
Well, I will say this. Let me first answer from the perspective of I was a prosecutor, and it was so important to me to be prosecuting cases in the community where I live, and to have the diversity in all parts of the process. The reality is, whether you're the prosecutor or you're the defense attorney or you're the jurist, that none of this works without all of the pieces. They're all necessary, but it's important that all of those pieces are reflective of and respectful of the community that you serve, right? In all of its layers. What I will say is that I can't leave my perspective and who I am at the door when I put my robe on. It's important because when I hear a case about, I don't care if it's 200,000 pounds of marijuana, if the probable cause for the stop isn't good, I'm not good. I don't want to hear the drug report. I don't want to see the chemist. You can keep the chemist, don't call the chemist. I don't care. What's the probable cause for the stop? Because that's what the law is, but it, to me, is common sense. And why is that so important to me? Because I am who I am. I started off by telling you I didn't come from a family of lawyers, okay? And as somebody that's worked in the community, I have friends and family and very close family members who are police officers. I have, my grandfather was murdered by a gang initiation, right? The godfather to my first daughter is a police officer, and I still remember the day when I got a call from my best friend and he had been shot in the line of duty. So I can't leave either one of those perspectives at the door when I sit on the bench. I don't think it's an either or thing. I don't have to be, pro, everybody, let's make sure that, or against this, because I believe that it all kind of works. If it's working properly, it works together. And when one piece is off, you got to address that piece, no matter how hard it is to deal with. Right? And so even if you've got the 200,000 grams of marijuana and you're dead wrong for having it, you're dead wrong, you shouldn't have it. If the probable cause for the stop isn't there, I can't bring myself to go any further. Now, that's not to say that once the ruling is done, I don't say to the person, listen, this today came out this way this day, but you were that close. You were that close to walking out of the side door and not coming out for a very long period of time, because I think that that's part of why it's important to have diversity on the bench, and why it's important, whether it's race or gender or socioeconomic status or perspective or whatever. It's so important to have that on the bench because you see all pieces of that, and you can address all
all pieces of that, but that's part of why I think our system is so good. It's not a perfect system. It's not a perfect system, but hearing especially those criminal law cases, and another hot issue now is the pre-sentencing incarceration, right? The pre-trial incarceration, the bail reviews when, it takes months before the trial date happens, and should people be incarcerated prior to even a probable cause hearing? And there's a lot of sort of public policy in that area right now. Right? But the policy shifts real quick when somebody was given bail and they go and kill somebody. That's, what judge let him out, right? Everybody has this philosophical view here, should people be incarcerated before there's even a trial, and is that fair, and is that appropriate, and how does that affect families and children if that's the breadwinner, and how many cases are actually dropped, so somebody sits in jail for 90 days and then there's no prosecution, and how do we weigh that against? But there are some factors that we need to be looking at to determine whether it's appropriate to release people prior to trial, and how do we balance all of that? I think it's important that judges look at the law, but also apply it in a way that is consistent with the realities of the situation that's facing our communities.
All right, wonderful. So I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. And I'm warning you now, don't be shy, because I put in questions myself that I would gladly use. But are there any questions on any topic that is burning on your mind? Yes.
Sure. When it comes to judicial discretion, I've read that some of the reasoning behind mandatory minimums was to pull back on inappropriate judicial discretion. Now we've kind of seen the effects of mandatory minimums have been pretty negative, and there's a return back now to giving justices more discretion in sentencing and in other things. But I guess to make the question a little more broad, do each of you trust in your experience working with other judges, trust fellow judges to wield that discretion appropriately, if discretion is given back to justices at large?
I think we have to trust our fellow judges, just as a general rule, because we have to trust the system. If we don't trust the system, why are we even participating in it? I mean, the day that I can say I don't trust any aspect of the system, I need to get another job. Now, having said that, when you take it down to the micro level, no, I don't trust some of my colleagues to have the patience to listen and not prejudge, but we all do it. So I have to say, when I see or suspect that one of them is doing that, that could be you, Tyra. Maybe it was me last week. So it reminds me to keep working on it. Now you might say, well, what does she mean by that? I'll just use unemployment appeals. There are judges who tend to understand the employer's position more easily than they do the worker, and vice versa. So that's just a fact. That's going to be the case, just because you bring who you are to it. So if we could at least listen. One of the things that Michelle Alexander, the author of The New Jim Crow, talks about is how she came to write that book. A young man spoke to her, and he was trying to tell her about the policies in New York where the young black men were getting stopped just frequently, and she blew him off the first time. And when she realized that what he was saying was the truth, she started delving into that subject, and the end result was the book. Well, that happens with us. Sometimes you prejudge. Sometimes you don't listen. Sometimes you think you know what someone is talking about, and if you ask that one additional question, or in the case of where parties are being represented, if you let that representative ask one additional question, it can change the case for you. And you'll see that you might have
been going down another road with your decision-making process that you will now go in a different direction because you allow that one additional question. And if we're honest with ourselves, and I think that's what you all want, that's why you're sitting here, if we're honest with ourselves, in an instant, you can have closed ears, even in our job. So it's a constant reminding yourself to listen, to take into consideration, weighing the credibility. Could that person have had the intention or the lack of intention? You just have to do that. So overall, yes, I trust the system. Do I know or suspect here and there that my colleagues might not be looking at the case the way I would? And I just want to wrap it up this way because I feel like I've been a little bit inarticulate here. I was trained regarding the Michigan Employment Security Act. That's the act that we apply to unemployment appeals. The purpose of that act is to get unemployment benefits to individuals, not to keep them from benefits. So when a case could go either way, it should go to the worker. I know that I have colleagues who don't believe that. Okay? That just means to me, and there's the activism part, that if I do believe that, I have to stick to that. And there, by the grace of God, if you're sitting in front of me, there's a reason why you're there and not somewhere else. That's the way I have to look at it, that every day I've got to do that job to the best of my ability and keep the most important thing the most important thing. And when that law is being applied, that's the most important thing. When the Wage and Hour Act is being applied, the most important thing is that worker getting the wages or fringe benefits that's due to them. When it's a licensing matter, has it been proven that that worker violated the occupational code? Not what I think of doctors or what I think of dentists. Has it been proven that they violated the code? Just keeping the basics, and trying to always work through your own biases.
I'll just be quick, just to piggyback off of what Tyra said, the reality is just like you learn in school about jurisdiction shopping. You're gonna wanna be in a jurisdiction you think that'll be most beneficial to your case. The District of Columbia, we probably have the most diverse judiciary probably anywhere in the country. And you're more likely to get a mixed match of people, but there's also a dice roll. You might get the most horrible judge and that just might be how it turns out. And that's how it is in my office. There are certain judges that will be horrifying if you're doing a labor and employment case and you get Judge so-and-so. There's nothing you can do about it. This is a system that we're involved in, and there's nothing that we can do to change it. I keep that in mind every time I'm there, and I remind my colleagues, like, well, what if blah, blah, blah. But I can't control how they write. I can't make a change. I can't do anything about that. That's the system that we spent years in law school trying to understand. And that's where it is across the country. So how do you handle that? I don't know.
My answer is simple, yes. I do trust my fellow judicial colleagues to appropriately apply sentencing even without mandatory minimum guidelines. The question is, why would we question whether judges could do that, but we don't bind their hands on anything else?
Yeah.
Right? I can rule on every other thing in those mandatory minimum cases, what comes in, what doesn't come in, whether it's good cause, probable cause, what this, that, and the other, right? And then I get to guilty and all of a sudden you don't trust me to make a decision? So if that's the way the legislature or the sort of all of the, I guess, public policy that led to that point, I mean, you have to look at the sort of hypocrisy in that, because the judges are making infinite amounts of decisions in a trial, and then all of a sudden at sentencing they've tied their hands. I think you do have to untie their hands. I do say that, and all the while acknowledging that just like in any other profession, they're bad judges, right? And they're judges that are gonna give everybody the maximum because that's just how they feel about marijuana, and everybody's going to jail. And even despite knowing that the public wave is really going the other way on something like that, right? And so you have to sort of wonder, well, if they're going to take the mandatory minimums away, should they do like they do with pre-sentencing incarceration, give us a list of factors that we need to be looking at and weighing and saying, what circumstances and how should you weigh that. But overall, I do trust members of the judiciary to do sentencing because I trust them to do everything that gets you to that point.
Any other questions? So Marks, how are we doing on time? I know it's 7 o'clock. Already over it. Well, I wanted to say that I had the opportunity to be a law clerk for a judge. His name is Damon Keith.
Oh my
God.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm looking for him right now.
Oh, yes.
He's wonderful.
It was the best experience of my life. So I think judges are what makes the law work. You have 3 wonderful judges here for people looking for clerkships. I didn't ask for this, but I think this is a great opportunity. I'm glad you took advantage of it, and I would like you to join me in giving them a warm round of applause. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
There's food.
Oh, there's food outside, so.
Oh,